Welcome back everyone, I'm Theo Joe and it is iPhone season. I'm sure you already know that Apple released 3 models this year, the iPhone 8, the 8 Plus, and the 10 or X. And the one we're going to go over today is the 8 Plus, which might not seem as exciting as the 10, but in my opinion, I'd rather have this than the 10 simply because of the fingerprint sensor, and I doubt I'm the only one. But this is not a comparison video. We're just gonna focus on the 8 Plus and do a Ruthless review. I'll tell you what I like, what I hate, and everything in between. And if you're wondering, no, I did not get this for free. I had to shell out the cash for it. So you know I'm not gonna sugarcoat anything. Now, as usual, before I jump in, I wanna give a quick plug to my Instagram account. I try to post really cool quality stuff on there. So if you wanna check that out, it's just @TheoJoe, and the link is in the description. So let's first start off with the visuals of the phone. The design is nearly identical to the iPhone 7 Plus with one notable exception I'll get into in a bit. On the front, we have the home button, of course, at the bottom, and at the top there's the camera, the speaker, and the proximity sensor. On the sides, there's the usual power button, SIM card tray, volume buttons, and the silent switch, as well as the speaker grills on the bottom and the lightning port. No surprises here at all. On the back, it's mostly the same story. You can see the dual camera lenses, one being wide angle, the other telephoto, and it's next to the flash and rear microphone. And we'll go into detail about the camera later. But the big difference here is the back of the phone itself, which is now glass instead of aluminum. It does look pretty nice, and the advantage of this is it allows for wireless charging, which I'm a big fan of, but we'll get to that later as well. Oh, and by the way, this is all water resistant with an IP67 rating, so it can be submerged in water up to 1 meter. All right, let's get back to the front with the screen, which is a 5.5-inch IPS panel, as usual, not OLED. And the resolution is 1920 by 1080, which for a flagship this size is actually pretty low. And I think the only reason Apple keeps putting these low resolution screens is to compensate for the tiny batteries they use. That being said though, the pixel density is still good to the point where you can't see individual pixels even up close. And comparing to a higher resolution screen like the original Pixel XL by Google at 1440p, I couldn't really tell a difference, so I would actually say it's acceptable as is. With it being IPS, you also get a couple more advantages, including the ability to go brighter than you normally would with OLED, and it is indeed significantly brighter than the OLED on the Pixel XL, for example. The other advantage is you can get a lot better color accuracy with IPS generally, which is still the gold standard in that case. A lot of professionals use IPS for their computer monitors, so it's not like this is an inferior screen at all. And I think this one does a great job handling low black levels too. The other thing to mention is the new iPhones have a true tone display, which means it will adjust not only the brightness of the screen depending on the environment, but also the white balance. This is pretty unique and helps because normally your brain might think it's looking at different shades of white depending on the surrounding light sources. So with all that, I'm definitely satisfied with the screen on here. Next, why don't we quickly go over the hardware that you can't see inside the phone. The brain of the iPhone 8 Plus is the A11 Bionic chip, which supposedly uses a neural engine. Whatever that is, Apple sure does love their meaningless buzzwords. But moving on, for storage, you have the option for either 64 or 256 gigabytes. And in this case, I have the 256. And I gotta say, having this much storage feels awesome because you literally don't even have to think about running out of space or taking too many photos or high resolution videos. So big props to Apple for going the extra mile for storage. But I really don't know why they made the only other choice 64 gigabytes. Such a big jump between the only two options does seem kind of strange. Anyway, other hardware includes the RAM, which Apple doesn't seem to list anywhere I saw, but it apparently has 3 gigabytes. Again, come on Apple, you're the only one who skips on the RAM. I mean, 3 gigabytes is definitely enough, but for a phone that can literally cost $1,000 after your price hike, it's a bit BS. Same goes for battery capacity, which is not listed anywhere as well. They just say how many hours it lasts in different uses, which we all know is completely useless and never comparable to real life, though a bit of research determined that it apparently has a 2691 milliamp hour battery, which is quite frankly ridiculously tiny. Now yes, I know iPhones are highly optimized, so they can get away with lower specs. But come on, if they added a normal sized battery, the battery life would be truly amazing. I think it's pretty ironic that Apple isn't afraid to make their phones bigger every year with enormous bezels, but God forbid they make it thicker to fit in a bigger battery and better hardware. Does anyone really care if their phone is like an extra millimeter thick? Anyway, let's move on. Finally, on the inside, I want to mention the new support for Bluetooth 5, which is a lot better than the previous version. For example, it has twice the range and twice the bandwidth. Now, that is only if both devices are using Bluetooth 5, but that will soon be used in a lot more accessories, and that is something to look forward to as the standard develops. All right, let's move on to performance, starting with my favorite part of any phone, the camera. Now, I know it got the highest DxO Mark rating of any phone, or at least until the Pixel 2 was announced, but I just wanted to tell you guys that you should not judge cameras based on this score. The scoring is mostly arbitrary and is good for a rough guess at best. As always, the best way to determine camera quality is to look at sample photos yourself. So, the back camera, as I mentioned before, has dual lenses, which both have optical image stabilization, and Apple doesn't give the details on the image sensors, but it's estimated that the equivalent focal lengths are somewhere around 50 millimeters for the telephoto and 28 millimeters for the wide angle. Now, as for the pictures this thing takes, you don't need some rating to see that it takes really awesome photos. Autofocus is lightning fast thanks to the phase detection autofocus, which they call focus pixels. And here you can see a couple example photos I took. This one is just after sunset, so it's relatively low light, but I really like the way it turned out. You can tell it's night, but also the areas around the trees are really lit up. I also took the same picture at the same time with my Pixel XL, and you can see there is a big difference in the way these phones created this image. The Pixel's photo was much more subdued in terms of saturation and was definitely more accurate to how the scene actually looked. And while they both do have some noise as you'd expect, I do think the Pixel's noise reduction wins out in this particular case, retaining more detail if you zoom in all the way and look. Here's another example where I just took a picture with lots of light. It's literally just the sky, but we can see that around the edges and especially in the corners, it was able to hold on to a surprising amount of detail and has minimal distortion as well. And with any lens, the resolution and sharpness is going to decrease the further from the center. So this is impressive. On the video side of things, the camera can also do 4K resolution at a whopping 60 FPS, which is pretty crazy. And for slow motion, it can do 1080p at 240 FPS. Take a look at this mechanical watch before and after I slow it down all the way. It's pretty neat. Maybe you never saw something like this before. You can actually see it kind of rotating and then going back and forth. Awesome that you can see it with this phone. Another thing I haven't mentioned yet with the camera is the new file formats you can choose. For images, you can now use HEIF, or High Efficiency Image Format, and for video, the H.265 codec. These formats allow images and video to be stored with higher quality and lower file sizes. So you might be surprised that the 4K 60 FPS video only seems to be about 50 megabits. I still think they should have increased the bitrate, but at least 50 megabits gets you a lot further with this codec than the regular one they used to use. So just keep in mind that the codecs are relatively new and not all devices might support them yet, but I'm sure they will soon, if not already. And quickly, before we move on, of course, I should mention the front-facing camera, which is definitely among the best I've used, at least from the Android phones I've used in the past. One thing I noticed is it has a slightly longer focal length than the Google Pixel, and I'm just using that as an example because it's what I've been using for a while. So that means it's a bit more zoomed in, but with selfies, you want that. That's because with wide-angle lenses, to fill the frame more with your face, you need to move it closer, which causes big-time distortion on your face. To combat this, you'd ideally hold your phone as far away as possible, then crop it. But with the longer focal length, there's less need for that here. All right, so on to battery performance. I was really happy actually with how the battery lasted on the 8 Plus, and I would consider myself a moderate phone user. I don't really play any graphics intensive games or anything, but I do check my email and other accounts and read stuff pretty regularly throughout the day. I know I was really harsh about the battery size before, but again, this thing obviously is heavily optimized pretty well, so it can pull it off. In the time I've been using it, I've pretty much finished every day with at least 30 to 40% battery left. And I don't know if this is just me, but it seems like the very first few percentages of the battery take a lot longer to use than the rest, but I could be wrong. As for charging, as I mentioned before, there is wireless charging, which is awesome, and even better, it's the QI wireless charging standard, or Qi. So you can basically use any wireless charging pad out there, not a proprietary one just made by Apple. Of course, it is slower than plugging it in, but it's ideal for maybe at night when you don't need to charge things very fast, or just plopping it down on a table. If you do need to charge quickly, the new iPhones do actually support fast charging, finally, but the catch is that you need to use one of the higher wattage USB-C chargers that Apple sells, such as the 29 watt one, and they are gonna cost at least $50, and you need to use a USB-C to Lightning cable, which is another $25. But with that, you are able to charge from around 0 to 50% in around 30 minutes. The only thing is, it doesn't seem to give you any indication that you are actually fast charging, which is a bit annoying, but at least it can do it. All right, now let's get to one of the most important things, user experience, such as how fast is this phone? Well, as you'd expect, this thing is snappy and responsive as any other flagship. No issues with stuttering at all. Everything seems to run always completely smooth. Another thing I wanted to say is how much I like the haptic home button. It's not an actual button, but rather just a solid state indentation basically with the fingerprint sensor built in. But Apple was able to use the haptic feedback to actually make this thing feel like you're pressing a real button. It's pretty crazy. The haptic feedback is not new to the 8 Plus, but I still wanted to mention it. And another returning feature is the 3D touch, where you press into the screen a bit harder and it will perform certain functions such as opening a context menu for shortcuts. Again, it kind of makes it seem like you're really clicking into the screen. I like it. All that being said, there are some software things that I find pretty annoying, but I guess this would be on any iPhone running the same version of iOS. Coming from Android, the first thing I noticed is how stupid the notification system is. And yes, I am gonna get a bit heated with this one. Why on earth does iOS not group notifications? If you're in a group chat or receiving chat messages, there's no reason why you need to see literally every single message listed on your lock screen, because it pushes all your other notifications down out of view. Also, apparently you can't put more than 4 icons at the bottom of the home screen when there is clearly room for another one. Why not give people the option to? You gotta be kidding me, Apple. All right, but anyway, let's just try and wrap this thing up. Some things, again, that I especially liked about the iPhone 8 Plus are the large storage capacity at 256 gigabytes, wireless charging, finally, even the Pixel phones don't have that, and also great camera quality. Some things I have mixed feelings about are the battery, because yes, it is a great battery life, but I know it could have been truly outstanding if Apple would just put in a normal sized battery. Also, there is fast charging, but it's ridiculous that you have to spend an extra $75 just to be able to do it. And some things I outright hate are these stupid cumbersome notification systems and the limitations on customization, such as how many icons you can have at the bottom or changing the default apps. But of course, those are software based and there's a glimmer of hope that Apple could change it. So overall, this is what I think. The iPhone 8 Plus is definitely a good phone, and even though it might not seem as flashy as the iPhone 10, it has pretty much all the features I would expect in a top-end phone. So if you've been considering switching to iPhone from Android, I honestly think this is a great one to start on. Now, on the other hand, if you have something very recent, or if you have the iPhone 7 Plus or something, which I have not used by the way, obviously the upgrades for this phone might not be that important to you, especially considering Apple raised the price of their phones by about $50 on the base cost. The 8 costs $700 and the 8 Plus costs $800 for the smaller storage sizes. It's definitely an incremental update, so I don't know if I'd recommend this to someone, even an Android user, unless they have a phone that's more than a year old, at least. I'm gonna finish this off by saying, even as someone who is used to Android, I'm definitely happy with this phone, with the few exceptions, of course, that I mentioned. Is it necessarily better than Android? I'm not sure. There are advantages to both, which would be a whole nother video to talk about. But if you do end up getting this phone, I don't think you'll be disappointed. So that's it. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. You can let me know down in the comments what you think. And by the way, I did buy a Pixel 2 as well, so I will be comparing the 8 Plus to that later on. Be sure to subscribe for that. And consider enabling notifications as well by clicking the bell, or YouTube literally might not show you any of my new videos anyway. If you want to keep watching, I'll put some videos right here. You can just click on those. And again, I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. So thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.